Absolutely. Ravi Rao, I've been around bio companies for a long time. I've had the opportunity to help the strategic journeys of 5 approved drugs and 2 biology discovery platforms. Since we left the last presentation talking about pedigree, I guess I'll start with mine. Undergraduate, University of Wisconsin, PhD from Penn, crystallographer, trained as a crystallographer, which is a fancy way of saying I used to take pictures of proteins. After I finished my PhD, I went into management consulting at Booz and Company, did that for several years, and then went to a series of large and small biotech companies, large companies, MedImmune, AstraZeneca, small companies, too many to name. Each of these companies, I was either tasked with building pipelines for larger companies or company building of smaller companies. So on the smaller company side, I've had the opportunity to take companies through stable execution, pivots or exits, both IPO and M&A. I am now a strategic advisor to Willow Neuroscience, and I want to tell you a bit about the story of Willow Neuroscience. So let me project my screen. I hope I am able to do this without any technical hitches. Can you see my screen? I'm assuming that you can. So our vision, our mission is to reset neuroinflammation to treat neurodegenerative diseases. But I'm not even going to start with
Hey, are you on campus here in Maryland, or where are you?
I'm in Maryland.
I know, but like on campus, in
Eric,
our house.
you're not
Yes.
muted.
Oh, just come over here for a second. I got to ask you something about something.
Okay.
All right, bye.
So our vision is to reset neuroinflammation and treat neurodegenerative diseases, but I'm not going to start there. I'm actually going to tell you a little story about cancer. So how are we fighting our fight against cancer? This was once upon a time. This is sort of what was considered to be safe weapons to fight against cancer: surgery, X-rays, and radium. Okay. This was a long time ago. This was a public service announcement from the US government. And this is what they're doing now in terms of what they're saying just for breast cancer. They're basically saying now that depending on the cancer that you have, you're going to get certain treatments. So if you're HER2 positive, HR positive, HER2 negative, you get certain treatments. If you're HR negative, HER2 positive, you get other treatments. That is sort of how evolved their understanding is for cancer.
All right.
So
let's see. Here's what's going on.
Eric, you're not on mute.
All right. There's the webinar.
Eric, you're not on mute.
Ravi, keep on going.
Do you just want me to talk over him?
Yeah, I'll fix it. Don't worry.
Okay. Sorry. So this is just for breast cancer that you have these different treatments for different subtypes, so to speak. So in many ways, what people are doing is, in terms of how we're doing, in winning our fight against cancer, different patients get different treatments, and they get different treatments based on biomarkers. So this is what they call precision medicine. So if you have a subclass of breast cancer, like the HR positive, the HER2 positive, you get a different treatment than if you're HR negative and HER2 positive. So as a result, the number of FDA approved drugs for just breast cancer alone is 86. For all cancers, 207. Okay. Comparing breast cancer to Alzheimer's disease, there are 6 approved drugs for Alzheimer's disease. So one of them just came a couple of years ago. We really are losing our fight against neurodegenerative diseases, in part because we're not able to bring these precision medicine concepts to neurodegeneration. So this brings me to our founders, Kati Andreasen and Michelle James. They are from Stanford. And Kati is the professor and the vice chair of the neurology department at Stanford. She's an MD. She's a clinician scientist. So up until very recently, she was still seeing patients, Alzheimer's disease patients. Michelle James is an assistant professor of radiology and neurology, and she's a PET tracer expert. And I'll get to why both of them are important to this journey. But their novel insight was how immune cells from your blood actually traffic into your brain and drive neurological disease. So the jargon here is peripheral innate immune cells and how the infiltration into the central nervous system, how that drives neurological disease. And as a result, it sets up a paradigm where you can actually go after precision neurotherapies that are enabled by biomarkers, imaging biomarkers. And I'll show you data on this, okay? So what Kati and Michelle have done is they've identified key checkpoints that reset or restore proper immune cell function and reduce this infiltration into the CNS. So our plan is to complete translational studies, antibody discovery campaigns, to nominate lead molecules. These would be the lead therapeutics in the next 12 to 15 months to support a Series A financing. And because this is a bold idea, this is the reason why we're approaching family offices. In some ways, we're still a little bit early for venture capital to come in, and we're raising $2.5 million to support lead identification to serve as a bridge to the Series A financing that would happen under a convertible note. I'll hit on this at the end of the chat. We've already raised about 0.5 million, so we're well on our way. Would love to sort of get some of you interested in the story as well. So our vision is to develop precision neurotherapies for stratified, again, jargon word for selected neuroinflammation high patients with neurological disease. Everybody knows about signal to noise. All we're trying to do is by selecting some of these neuroinflammation high patients, we're just setting up that better signal to noise ratio in these clinical trials.
Hey, Ravi, one quick question. Has Willow raised any grants and a non-dilutive equity?
We have not yet, and we right now the NIH has opened up some biologic neurological disease grants, so we're in the process of applying for it this year. Marty, as you may appreciate, a lot of that is like what the NIH and the SBIR and all of that, what the calls are for different focus areas. Okay. And again, because this is a bold concept in neurology versus cancer, cancer wins all day long. So how can we win in our fight against neurodegeneration? You look at from your genome to what happens to you as a human. There's multiple levels. So this is what I'll call the scale of biology. The genome, well, the genome itself is modified by the epigenome that could turn on or off genes. And then the transcriptome, it's like sort of what you make out of the genome and the epigenome, right? And this is how cells start functioning. And there are, of course, environmental modifiers that come in and modify these things as well. And then cells get together, then you have multicellular function, and then you get to the tissue organ level function, and then you get to a organism level function. So if you look at what tools we have, we can actually use what they call multiomics. So you can use genomics, proteomics, and so on and so forth to really understand a lot of these buckets. And on the phenotype aspect, people have been traditionally relying on doctors. You can go into a doctor's office, the doctor will tell you how you're doing, but there's also a lot of exploratory, whether it's AI or wearable driven. If you have an Apple Watch, it'll tell you what your heartbeat is. That was only going to get better and better and better. So the technology is actually really improving. But between these two things is a black box, right? Multiomics is static. It tells you what you have. And phenotype is more dynamic. It tells you after you have a disease that you have a disease. Well, I'd rather know as we're getting a disease that we're getting a disease. And so this is sort of the black box that exists, which is the functional processes. And that right now is harder to measure. And this is sort of where Willow comes in, at least for neurodegeneration. In some ways, the challenge for Willow is very high because you're trying to peer into perhaps the most important organ in your body, but also the least accessible. You can't get in there to like really look at like what is happening inside your head, in your brain. So these functional processes and being able to measure these functional processes is really critical. This is the nut that Willow has cracked thus far. So certain functional processes and pathophysiology can be imaged, and I'll show you data on this. That's what we have. And then if you can image those functional processes, you can basically say, like, look, I can develop a therapeutic against it, and it becomes a yin and yang where, look, I can select patients with these functional processes that are going wrong. And when I reset those functional processes, I'm going to get a better signal to noise ratio, have a better success rate in the clinic. And so these images can be correlated to phenotype. The correlative things are what they call biomarkers. Anything that impacts pathophysiology is what they would call a surrogate biomarker. And of course, as I mentioned, you can develop these therapeutics for the image pathophysiology over time. And where have we seen this? We've seen this with cardiovascular disease. Now cholesterol and all the subsets of cholesterol are a surrogate for understanding functional processes. It took a long time for the industry to develop it. When you correlate it with multiomics, eventually you can actually get a test in your doctor's office that tells you that you're at high risk for Alzheimer's well before you get the disease, so that you can reset your lifestyle, take therapeutics, and so on and so forth, so you can age better and fight neurodegeneration better. Okay, so idea here, quod vidimus, vincimus, what we can see, we can conquer. So the silver bullet here is resetting maladaptive inflammation, because what starts in the periphery invades the brain. And when you're able to identify patients who have this maladaptive inflammation that drives some of this dysfunction, you can then sort of design a break from the pyromaniac that is setting your brain on fire to reset the immune system. So our core value proposition is that we can see this maladaptive inflammation. I'll show you some data around this. We have identified critical flywheels of this maladaptive inflammation. We can intervene and hit the reset switch. That enables our mission to turn neurodegenerative diseases into manageable conditions in a patient-centric manner. Okay. Let me go through how we see maladaptive inflammation. I'm not going to go through this. This was just like recently published in Science, that there's an imaging biomarker, TREM1, that it enables us to detect these toxic innate immune cells. And this is the data. And this is a mouse. And you can see here that we're comparing our imaging agent to another imaging agent. And I'm going to tell you how to look at this. Okay. First of all, when you look at a mouse with no disease, okay, you can see our imaging agent only staining a little bit of the heart where a lot of the blood is, maybe a little bit of the spleen, okay? The spleen is a staging area, and so you can kind of see the spleen being stained. Whereas this other agent just stains the entire blood pool of the mouse. So it is not very specific. Now, when you start getting disease, so this mouse is given something very similar to multiple sclerosis, okay? When you start getting this disease, okay, there are no symptoms. You can't tell from a phenotype. If we were to take this to a mouse doctor, the mouse doctor will say, you look good, nothing's wrong with you, okay? But you can see, again, this other agent, all they're doing is just staining the blood pool. But you can see the spleen lighting up. You can see the spinal cord lighting up. This is before you even have a presentation of disease, okay? Look at the spleen. It's chock full of these immune cells that are invading the central nervous system. And as you start getting clinical presentations of disease, that only intensifies when you have very significant disease. You can see all the central nervous system lighting up, whereas there's no differentiation here with this other agent. And this is what a lot of people are using right now to image CNS diseases. As a result, we're actually doing a disservice to patients. We're not helping them. I think in many ways, we have to develop this agent, our agent, so that we can actually help identify diseases earlier. Okay. This is another way of looking at it, and I'm just going to talk to just this graph. This is a disease, again, it's mouse multiple sclerosis, but it comes and goes. If you've known anybody with multiple sclerosis, they get flares. The disease comes and goes. So whenever you see the disease coming and going, when you get a first wave, you get more infiltration. When you get a remission, it kind of goes down, not quite down to like where it was. It's still a little bit high. And when you get a second disease, it goes back up. So this tells us that our agent can actually track the comings and goings of neurodegenerative diseases. This is very important. Again, what you can see, you can conquer. That's sort of what we're enabling here, okay? And this is, MS is actually pretty lucky. There are some drugs that are available to treat MS. And so what we're showing here is that a mouse with no disease, mouse with the clinical disease, and a mouse with a treatment. And so what you're seeing here is that when you actually use the MS treatment, this is Gilenya, fingolimod, as they call it in our industry. That particular drug is pretty good for MS, and you can see that actually the PET is what they would call a prognostic marker, because when it goes down, it tells you that the disease is resolved, right? So it actually detects the amelioration of disease from a therapeutic setting.
Ravi?
Yeah.
We've got about 5 minutes, so can we get to a point where we can start asking you some questions?
Sure, absolutely. So the next thing is that we have identified critical flywheels of maladaptive inflammation. I'll go fast, Marty. Here, you have normal immune cells, but when the immune cells actually see danger signals, so viruses, infections, damaged cells, amyloid, aging, so on and so forth, they actually become maladaptive. If you're an Avengers fan, I kind of like analogize this to Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk. It just actually transitions to a very, very angry cell. And there's amplification of this, okay? I'm not going to talk to you about peripheral immune cells. I'm just going to skip this. But one of the things that happens is that peripheral immune cells can actually affect the brain. The brain is highly vascularized. It's only about 4 cells thick. Wherever you look at it, it's surrounded by blood vessels. The immune cells can actually get into the brain. There's active transport of bad stuff into the brain, passive transport of bad stuff in the brain, as well as like modulation of the endothelium, which is the blood wall lining in the brain as well. All of these contribute and drive to neurodegeneration. So this is sort of what we have identified, is that some of the initial danger signals are sensed by EP2, and the EP2 then itself upregulates TREM1, and then the TREM1 actually sets away a runaway inflammation, these cycles, these flywheels of nastiness that happens in your body, right? And so that's really what we're looking to disintermediate here. I'll let you read this. We have new proprietary biology on TREM1 with a clear definition of what we need to do. We have assays ready to go for EP2 for antibody discovery. TREM1 would be a twofer. You would discover a therapeutic as well as that PET tracer. So it would be a twofer, essentially. We have negotiated a number of IP from Stanford. I have a great relationship with Stanford. And we're raising $2.5 million in convertible notes that will provide a bridge to Series A financing. I have listed my contact information and contact information of Kati. So happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So Ravi, maybe you can go back to the prior slide.
Yep, got it. Give me 1 second.
Just waiting for you to get there.
Yep.
There you go. Great. So how do you get antibodies to cross the blood-brain barrier? If you can answer that like quickly, because I've got to get to financials as well to discuss with you.
No, absolutely. The cells that are invading your CNS, they actually take it with them, because we're going to give the antibodies peripherally. And remember what I showed you, that these immune cells start out in the periphery and they invade the CNS. So in many ways, they're actually taking that particular therapeutic into the brain as well.
Great. And so can you talk about how much So, people get Alzheimer's and they get different diseases. How much do the therapeutics cost to handle these sorts of diseases? Are they expensive on an annual basis, or
I
what's the
mean, it's
economics?
billions of dollars is the pharmacoeconomic damage of diseases like Alzheimer's. There really isn't any like good therapeutics against Alzheimer's. I don't know if you guys have followed the most recent antibody that got approved. It doesn't do a good job, but it's approved, and it's like, sort of 50,000 per therapy, and it doesn't even work that well, right? Like so
I'm
as
sorry,
a
so you're saying
result,
it's $50,000 annualized
per patient.
a year,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, and what's the size of the market?
The size of the market is multiple billions of dollars, right? So it is estimated to be about 321 billion in 2022, estimated to be more than $1 trillion in the next 10 years. So the therapeutics would form a very good basis there. This is actually a really huge underserved market.
And most of the Alzheimer's drugs are paid these days by Medicare. Is that because most of the patients are elderly?
That's correct. It's Medicare Part B. So yeah, for sure.
Right. And even if you're a patient who's like indigent and you're living in, some kind of health facility for the aging or something like that, assisted living, let's say, you're still receiving the same therapeutics, correct?
Yeah, and as long as they have the right insurance, right? Like if they're indigent, are you going to get treated for Alzheimer's? I don't know the answer to that, but there's 6 million Americans living today with Alzheimer's. That's just Alzheimer's alone. There's so
And
many other
have you guys applied?
neurodegenerative
So you're trying to
diseases.
raise $2.5 million. Have you applied for any grant money yet at this point, or?
I'd mentioned that before because you'd asked the question before, is that we didn't
Sorry,
get the right calls, and so we're in the process of applying now that
you're applying right
there's
now,
a
right?
right
Right.
call. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think I'd like to see more of an economic discussion in the near future about what people are paying now. So that way people can understand what the opportunity is from a business point of view. I understand the whole mission aspect to it, which is kind of like a norm sort of thing. But I think it would be interesting to hear more about the economics involved in this sector. I mean, obviously everybody's touched by Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, right? So,
Yeah. So that's what I mentioned. So I'm not sure what else you want to hear, but there's been systematic reviews. There's tons of data. Happy to kind of go into it. But aducanumab that just got approved was in the $56,000 average range. So the actual range would be up to 84,000, depending on how the pricing works. So that's sort of what the annualized costs are of a current approved therapy that's not even as good as what we can do. So there is a willingness to pay up to $100,000 per patient, what they call a pharmacoeconomic benefit or quality adjusted life years, a QALY. So there's up to $100,000 you can charge per patient times 6 million patients, right? And so it's hard to say that that's what the market is going to be. It's going to be some fraction of that, but these are hopefully numbers that you can take away.
perfect, Ravi. Listen, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.